Well, this last weekend, I wasn't here. I spent it with 45 of my people, young people, students, and we had our annual snow camp. And it's one thing for us to come up and share with you and say and talk about it and say we did this, and this. But I thought it would be way cooler for you guys to get a little visual of what we actually do. Because you guys, in large part, support us and help us and invest in the lives of our young people. And so we want to give you a real quick 2-minute recap of Snow Camp this last weekend. Direct your attention to the screens. All right, see how we cut that? We left you wanting more. You're like, what? There's more. Yeah. We did that on purpose. That wasn't just an abrupt end. That we left you wanting more. But we had an absolute blast. You saw it on the video. But fourth quarter is not all about the fun. We do have a lot of fun, but there is purpose to the fun. We play with them so we can pray with them. And I want to encourage you this morning, something is up in the lives of our young people. Something is happening. The Wednesday before we left to snow camp, a student invited a friend. That friend at the end of the night responded to accept Jesus. Last Wednesday, we got back from snow camp. A student who just started coming to our student ministry within the last 3 weeks responds and accepts Jesus. Something is happening in our student ministry. And Up at camp, one student, a junior hire, told me this. They said, God spoke to me on the day that you had us have a conversation with God, and I surrendered my life to him. Another student said, I came here with baggage, and I'm going to leave with that weight off my shoulders. I really did come here for a reason. I'm telling you, something is happening in our student ministry. Another student told me, said this, that when you were preaching, I felt something change inside of me. When I was worshiping, I was giving it my all. Another student shared with me, when I used to do drugs, I used to drink, I used to smoke, and I realized it was messing up my life. God brought me happiness. And I'm just going to tell you this. They don't know how to word it. They haven't been around church enough to get inoculated with all of our church talk. But in the most simplest terms, there is a difference, because before I was like this, but when I'm hanging out with God, this is what happens, and there's something different, and I want more of that. You know, I had a student explain, after having a conversation with God this weekend, I felt like God has put it in my heart to serve Him, my church family. I'm tired of sitting in the back and being part of the crowd. A new student, less than a month coming to fourth quarter, came with us to snow camp, and this is what they said. They said, this weekend was the start of a new journey. I never used to be religious, but since coming to fourth quarter, I really started to try and make a connection with God. Yesterday, during our prayer time, I felt I heard Him. God is up to something around here, and it's real, and it's authentic, and it's deep, and it's full of hope. And I just got to tell you, like, honestly, it does not get better than this. Like, Neighborhood Church, something is happening, and we serve a God who is serious about freeing people. We serve a God who is serious about removing the things that bind us and hold us back. And our young people are starting to realize that it's for real. And I'll be honest with you, none of that could happen without the incredible volunteers who help out in our student ministry. They show up every week. They pour into these students. And they are the true heroes around here because they make stories like this even possible. And guess what? They are ordinary people who God is using to do extraordinary things. Which brings us to our series this morning, which happens to be about ordinary people, an extraordinary God. And it's this idea that God can do extraordinary things in the lives of ordinary people. Like, we think that God only uses certain people. And we look at people and we go like, wow, they've got it all together. Like, is there anything they can't do? And we look at people and we kind of judge them a little bit, and we go, they've got everything that I would be looking for about what someone should have. And we create this idea that God only uses certain kind of people. But in reality, God takes ordinary people who submit their lives to Him, and He does extraordinary things in their life and through their life. A few weeks ago, Pastor talked about Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, and how God anointed him in the area of administration. Now, administration is not the area that most people would be like, wow, that's what I want to have. Like, you don't get a microphone with that. You don't get an instrument with that. You're not in front of people as much with that. But he talked about how God, anointed him in this area and brought structure to over 1 million people under Moses' leadership. And then we spoke about Hannah and how God used this ordinary lady who trusted Him with her most valuable treasure, and how God extraordinarily blessed her life. Last week, Kim Clements, one of our teaching pastors, she walked us through the life of Abigail and how this ordinary lady influenced David in an extraordinary way, ultimately influencing his destiny. And so we're going to talk about an ordinary person today, and the ordinary person we're going to talk about today is a fellow by the name of Jabez. And his story is found in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. And let's read it together. It should be up on the screen. It says this: Jabez was more honorable than his brothers, and his mother called him Jabez, saying, because I bore him in pain. Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, so that it might not bring me pain. And God granted what he asked. Heavenly Father, I just ask for these next few moments that you would move me aside. God, you would help me to express what you put on my heart, and that you would help me to do it in such a way that it would make sense, that we could wrap our mind around this and glean what you would have for us. God, speak into our hearts today in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, all that is known about this fellow Jabez, we just read. 66 books of the Bible, there's nothing else. It's this. But right here in these two verses, we get a profile of an ordinary person who experiences extraordinary blessing from God. And, a lot of us in this room, we understand what a profile is. We come across them in social media. In fact, if you have a social media account of any kind, one of the first things you have to do to be on social media is you have to create what's called a profile. And in that profile, it's the bullet points of someone's life, right? It's the compilation of your most important life characteristics. And right here in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, nestled in the middle of 9 chapters of 936 unpronounceable names, is in the first ancestry tree. The pause button is hit, and God creates a profile for a fellow named Jabez. And so what we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at this profile, and from that we're going to pull out some principles and hopefully attempt to apply some of that to our life. And so the first is this, as we look at the profile of Jabez. He lived out God's principle of honor. He lived out God's principle of honor. It says here, Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. See, Jabez is known for his honor. And not only does it cause him to stand out in a crowd, we also find that it attracts the favor of heaven. The word honor here in the Hebrew is kabad, K-A-B-A-D. It's a unique word because it's a word that is used to identify those who are honorable. And it's also a Hebrew word to identify those who are honored. And I don't want you to miss this because it's the same word to describe both those who honor and those who are honored. In other words, it's a reciprocating term. You can't be a person who honors without being a person who is honored. And not everybody understands this biblical principle. See, honor is not something that you can show unless you are willing to properly identify and value someone when they walk in the room. When someone of significance walks into a room, a person of honor doesn't kick back and remain seated and go, hey, what's up? If you are a person of honor, when someone of significance walks into a room, you stand up, you extend your hand, and you say, hello, my name is. It is an honor to meet you. And why do we say things like that? Like, why do we do that? Because we understand the value of the person who just walked into the room. But this idea of honor doesn't begin with the ability to properly identify and value people. It really begins with your ability to properly identify and value God when He walks into the room. See, there is no reason, there is absolutely no reason to have to motivate people to praise God in church when God walks in the room. If we have to have someone beg us to praise Him, it's because we really don't know Him yet. If we really know God, then when He walks in the room, you forget about who's sitting next to you. You forget about what's going on social media, and you put your phone down. When God walks in the room, you stop thinking about what you're going to do for lunch later on today. When someone of significance walks into the room, and you are a person of honor, you stand and you say, "It is an honor to be in your presence." And we got to wrap our mind around this, because if we don't properly value people and we don't properly value the things of God, we can actually dishonor what God's hand is on and miss the blessing. What you honor, you invite in your life. What you dishonor, you repel. You don't get the favor of God in your life as long as you run around and try to be the deputy sheriff of the kingdom of God, telling the world how everybody else is off but you. If you want to be someone whose life is honored, then you have to be someone who honors. And let me just tell you that most people who dishonor do so from a place of insecurity. Jabez was a fellow who was known for the honor he demonstrated and the honor that he received. When you sow honor, you reap honor. when you properly value God and his presence, and you properly value people, it just brings a rising quality to your life. You stand out. See, you can't experience all that God has for you when you operate in dishonor. Like, let's just look at an area where this works. Marriage. Fellas, I dare you to stop dishonoring your wife, begin to honor her, and watch things begin to turn. Ladies, I dare you to stop calling out the fool in him and start calling out the king in him and watch things begin to turn. If you walk in honor in your marriage, God will bless your marriage. Another area this works in is in relationship with your parents. Walk in honor with your mom and your dad. In fact, God says if you honor them, your mother and father, I'm going to attach a blessing to it. If you honor your mom and dad, I'm going to attach a blessing to it. And what's the blessing? Honor your father and your mother, and your days on this earth will be long. See, if you honor people, your life will mean something. Jabez is not known for his great gifts. He's not known for his speaking ability. He's not known for his musical ability. He's not known for any ability. He's not known for any talent. He's not known for any great gift, but he is known in heaven and on earth as a man of honor. He honored and he was honored. So let's make this personal. What about you? Are you living a life of honor? Are you recognizing the value in the people around you? Are you properly valuing the things of God? Is God's principle of honor at work in your life? It was a mark of an ordinary fellow named Jabez, and it elevated him amongst his family and amongst his peers. And the question is it a mark of your life? The second thing we see in Jabez's profile is that he refused to let pain define him. He refused to let pain define him. Have you ever been labeled by somebody? Have you ever been called a name? We'll just go there. Have you ever been called a name? You don't need to raise your hand. But some of you are like, okay, he didn't ask. Put it down. Labeling for me started in elementary school. First grade, I had a teacher. And at the start of every class, she would stand up there and she would do the roll call for school lunch. And she would ask everybody to raise their hand if they want to get school lunch that day. And so I remember every morning she'd get up and she would say what the lunch is, and then she'd say, if you want school lunch today, raise your hand. And then she'd write that down. She'd put it on a clip outside the front door, and one of the, cafeteria ladies or office ladies, they'd come by and they'd pick it up and they would get lunch ready throughout the morning for how many kids wanted lunch. Simple process. Simple thing. But one day, it turned terribly wrong for me. On this day, school lunch was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I don't know what was going on in my teacher's life that day, but somehow she got confused, she got discombobulated, and she stands up there at the beginning of class. All the kids are ready and at attention, and she goes, how many of you, raise your hand if you want peanut butter and Jeffy? Peanut butter and Jeffy. My name happens to be Jeff, if you don't know. From that time on, I was known as Peanut Butter and Jeffy. PB&J. Kind of fun. I mean, not super cruel. But you get labeled. You get labeled. Labels define us. And thankfully, I mean, there's a lot of, tough reasons. I've shared this before in my life. Growing up, I lived all over the country. We moved every 2 to 4 years. And so that label didn't stick with me very long because we moved to a different state. But kids are cruel. And even though I try to reinvent myself, I got labeled again. 3rd grade. I remember being on the school bus. Back when mom and dad weren't the school bus, but they actually had those big yellow buses, and it was like a rite of passage. Everyone had to go on the school bus. It's just what you did. I was on the school bus. Kept to myself. But there was this kid who was kind of obnoxious, and he was just kind of a jerk. And he would keep turning around, and he would just kind of poke me verbally. And he'd called me fat. He called me some other names. I'm not going to share them with you. It's not because I don't remember them. I'm 45 years old. I still remember the names that were told to me when I was 8. Call it sad, but it's true. But I would say nothing because I didn't want the drama. He's just trying to instigate something. He's just trying to get a rise out of me. He's just trying to convey to all the other kids about how cool he is by pushing me down. But as a quiet fella, there's something you got to know with quiet fellas. There is a point where quiet fellas just say, I'm kind of done. Right? All my quiet fellas, we just kind of get done, and then we're going to talk. We're going to do something, and it's probably not good. So he turned around, and he was really frustrated, and he's like, why don't you talk? Why don't you say something? And so I got to that point after a while, I was just done. And so he wanted a response. So I just gave him one, the only one I could really think of. And so I lifted up my foot and I stomped my foot in his face. And the tread from my Reeboks could be like seen on his cheek. Oddly enough, he never really had too many words for me after that. I don't know what it is. He wanted a response and I gave it to him, and then he's just kind of done. But labels have a way of sticking with us. Labels have a way of putting us in the box that it can just be hard to get out of because we just get known as this or we get known as that. And somebody says you're the fat one or you're the ugly one or you're the nerd or you're the loser or you're the this or that. And these labels can become very difficult to get away from. And Jabez dealt with his labels too. It says Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. And then it says this. It says his mother called him Jabez. And in Hebrew, one of the meanings of Jabez is pain. And she said, the reason why I called him pain is because I bore him in pain. Now, the Hebrew tradition of naming kids was a big deal. Kids were not named by going on the internet and looking up the top 10 trendy names for the year that you are in. When they named a child, the names were exclusively given because of the meaning that was attached to them, and it was to describe a characteristic in the child. For example, the Old Testament, there's a fellow by the name of Solomon. He was a king. He was David's son. His name means peace. And sure enough, he became the first Israelite king without going to war. And so as we learn about Jabez's mom, she names him Pain. Here's my little Pain. And we've all seen the T-shirts or whatever about that with little kids, and there's a part of that where like, oh, that's kind of funny, but it's kind of weird too. Like what mom would willingly and purposely hang that label on her little child? Like, we don't really know why she did it, but we know this. And I want you to get this I think this is something that could matter to you. She named him according to her pain. She named him according to her pain. His identity was a product of her drama. It was her pain, but it became Jabez's problem. And I want you to hear this because some of us in this room this morning are wrestling with an identity that had nothing to do with you. Someone projected their pain and their problems on you, and now you're trying to live a life recovering from a label that somebody else put on you. And this is what life has done to some of us. Somebody else's problem became your pain. Somebody else's drama became your identity. Someone else had sorrow, and instead of running to Jesus to get healed, they ran to you and they projected their pain onto you. And so what happens is we start getting attached with these different labels. You ever go to a conference and they have those little hello, my name is, and you got to write your name? It's the same kind of thing. We hello, my name is, but instead of knowing who you are in God, you got your identity from somebody who lost. And they called you loser. And so that gets stuck to you. Hello, my name is victim. Hello, my name is should have been. Hello, my name is not enough. Hello, my name is addict. Because someone who had influence in your life was addicted. And the only way that they could find comfort in their pain was to create you and call you an addict. And now that's the only way they could feel good about themselves, and they have now just pulled you into their pain. Hello, my name is orphan. Hello, my name is unwanted. Or my name is accident. Or my name is failure. Hello, my name is molested. And I feel like damaged goods. Because someone else had a tough childhood and they took their pain out on me and they did to me what somebody else did to them because it was the only normal that they knew. And so now I am trapped in the pain. You see, we got people sitting in these chairs this morning that are full of labels. Stupid. Can never do anything right. Dumb. Never be. You'll never be like your brother. You'll never be like your dad. And so you take on that label and you find yourself covered with all of these. And you're living with a label that somebody else put on you. And I want to tell you this morning, God didn't do it. God didn't do it. God didn't call you unwanted. God didn't call you accident. God didn't call you failure. God didn't call you any of those. You want to know what he does call you? He calls you son. God calls you daughter. And you show up at church and you hear about how God feels about you, but you go home and you look in the mirror and you see all of this. See, not only did Jabez have labels, not only did they call him Jabez, not only was his name a result of someone else's pain, but he also had some lids in his life. Y'all know what a lid is, right? A lid is something you put on top of a container to keep the contents in and to keep other things out. It's a cap. It's a ceiling. And it hangs over your head, and it always seems to control your life. And a lot of time, I'll just be honest with you, it seems like it's generational. And so you have people walking around saying things like this: this family's never going to get a break. This family's never going to change. This family's never going to get a breakthrough. This family's never going to turn around. You know what? Grandparents were that way. Your parents were that way. I'm discovering I'm not that way. There's not much hope for you. Because don't look now, you're going to be that way. And I just got to tell you, somebody's got to stop the drama. You can curse your future if you want to, but pardon me while I believe for the goodness of God to be revealed in my life. Amen. And I'm sorry if your family didn't get in on this, but if you have come too late to tell me that Jesus died and came and rose again so I could feed off the crumbs when God has set a table for me. And so when we read Jabez's profile, we read about labels, we read about, the lids, the caps that he had to deal with. We read about the pain in his life, yet he was more honorable than his brothers. Yet he stood out from the crowd. Yet he refused to let pain define him. He refused to let it hold him back. And my question this morning is, do you? See, whether your mom gave you that name or not, everyone in this room is familiar with pain. Physical pain, mental pain, relational pain, family pain, spiritual pain. We know pain. And the question of whether or not you stand out honorably has little, if anything, to do with whether or not you have got pain in your life. It has little to do with the circumstances that you have found yourself surrounded by. And if that is true, then what are you allowing to define yourself with? Jabez refused to let the pain define him. It was a mark of an ordinary fella named Jabez. And it pushed him to find his true identity in God. Is it a mark of your life? The third thing we see in Jabez's profile is that he humbly sought the blessing of God. It says this: Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, "Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border." Now, this is one of the most unusual prayers in the Bible. Most of us teach our kids not to pray this way. And I'm pretty sure I have preached against praying like this. It seems selfish, doesn't it? Now, to be sure, there's all kinds of abuse with this kind of praying. Some people have taken it. They have embraced what is generally considered a prosperity gospel, where you just trust God, and if you do, it's going to be all health and wealth and prosperity for you. Some people have taken Jabez's prayer, and they recite it several times a day as some sort of lucky rabbit's foot for their success. And nothing could be further from the heart of this prayer. We've already established through Jabez's profile that he's a man of honor and that he recognizes and values the things of God. But get this, when you get to the last line of this prayer, you find out that God granted his request. God said yes. He got a yes. And what I'm trying to explain this morning is that there's something going on here that God did not think was wrong at all. And I think we have to ask ourselves, what does it really mean to ask for God's blessing? Bruce Wilkinson wrote a book called The Prayer of Jabez. It's like probably almost 20 years old by now and sold like 10, 15 million copies. He explains it this way, and it's a really cool nugget I want to share with you. He said this: to bless in the biblical sense means to ask for or to impart supernatural favor. When we ask for God's blessing, we're not asking for more of what we could get for ourselves. We're crying out for the wonderful, unlimited goodness that only God has the power to know about or give us. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. Could it be that when we think blessing and when God thinks blessing, we're using the same words, but there's two different meanings? We're thinking about stuff and things and more money to afford the stuff and things, but really when it comes to asking for God's blessing, he's thinking about giving his supernatural favor. Not about stuff we can get for ourselves. He's thinking about giving more of himself. The unlimited goodness. The unlimited goodness that only God has the power to know or give us. And I'm going to tell you something, and maybe you've not heard this in church before, but I'm just going to throw it out there. It is okay to ask God to bless you. It is okay to ask God to bless you. He's your loving Father. He wants to bless you. And I suggest that he wants to bless you more than you even want to be blessed. But what he also wants is he wants his kids who would be humble enough to acknowledge that they need his hand in their life. So don't be so fiercely independent. Don't be so self-made that you will only live within the bounds of what you can do. How sad. I remember when I was in high school, I was in a church service and I really felt like God was talking to me. And it was during the message and I really just felt like God, you ever sit and he's like, man, they're talking like right to me. It was one of those kind of moments, right? And maybe you're like me, and you might be more of a quiet individual. I'm typically more of a quiet individual, but it doesn't mean I'm not. Doesn't mean I don't got stuff going on up here. Because when someone's talking to me, I'm talking back at them. It's just not coming out. I don't process outward. I process inward. And so during the message, they're talking, and I'm thinking about it and all that stuff. And when it came to the response time, I really had to fight through some of the negative self-talk in my head and a lot of the fears and a lot of that stuff. I really had to deal with some of that stuff in my head just to walk up front during the response time. But I remember when I got to the front, someone asked me this question, and I thought it was so weird. Like, who asked that? But they asked, why did you come up here? And part of me is like, duh, you just asked us to. Like, what? I'm not really a real follower, but in that moment I was, right? But as I thought about it more, this is what I told them. I said, I came up here because I want all that God has for me. That's why. We opened this morning, and you kind of heard me bragging about our young people a little bit. And we hear about all the awesome things that God is doing. I mean, hang out with the young people for like 2 minutes and get encouraged and inspired. But you hear about all the cool things God is doing. In our heads, we ask, well, why is God doing that in their lives? Like, why is God doing stuff in our young people's lives? Why is he doing it in our students' lives? And I'll tell you. Because they are hearing that God has something for them. And listen, some of them are starting to put it together. And they're going, well, if God has something for me, purpose and hope and forgiveness and freedom and blessing, if God has something for me, then I want what God has. Then I want it. If you're telling me that God has all this stuff for me, then I want it. And we get a sense here from Jabez of a fella who just wanted all that God had for him. He's not asking for something that God doesn't want to do in his life. He humbly sought the blessing of God. And I just ask you, what are you seeking? Are you asking for man's blessing or are you asking for God's blessing? And what does that blessing look like? It was the mark of an ordinary fellow named Jabez, and it drove him to the throne room of heaven. Is it a mark of your life? Fourth and final thing is this. He took a proactive approach to temptation. It says this, Jabez called upon the God of Israel, saying, oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my border. And here's what I want you to clue in on, this last part here. It says, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, so that it might not bring me pain. See, Jabez knew that as he humbly asked for God's blessing, along with it would come more responsibility. It would enlarge his territory. It would enlarge his limits, the circle of what he knew. And honestly, it would stretch what he was comfortable with. And if he was going to ask for blessing, it meant that he had to be ready for the responsibility that came along with it. And I want you to hear this. Jabez knew something that was essential. Jabez knew that the blessing of God without the hand of God is dangerous. You say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, let me say it this way. That is why wise fathers do not give their 16-year-old sons with permit in hand a brand new Ferrari. Y'all understand what I'm saying? You give a 20-year-old athlete a multi-million-dollar contract to play professional sports, and then we wonder why they get into trouble. Is this making any sense? There's a reason why 5 years after receiving a windfall of money, 70% of lotto winners are broke. Blessing without the hand is a terrible thing. And so proactively, before it ever happens, Jabez asked God, will you keep your hand on me? Will you guide me? Will you lead me? Will you help me? Because I don't want the blessing without you. And quite honestly, the blessing is him. And that's the genius of his prayer. It's not just that he had the humility to ask for a blessing, but he had the wisdom to ask for guidance, to proactively address the temptations that always come with blessings. And if you want to know what to look out for, I'll tell you, it's pride. Because blessings stoke our ego. Where moments before, your eyes are on God and you're just like, man, life doesn't get any better. And it doesn't take long before we start to think that somehow we don't need him anymore. I mean, just go back and read the Old Testament. The Israelites, they get their eyes off God. They start getting in trouble. They cry out to God, save us. God comes in, saves them. And they're, life's great. Blessing of God. This is awesome. And then they start, getting their eyes off God and say, you know what, this is really kind of us. I'm just going to keep doing God, we're good. I don't need you anymore. And then all of a sudden they find themselves down the road in trouble. And they cry out to God again. God's like, okay. God comes back and saves them. It's this up and down. It's this roller coaster. It happened back then to the Israelites who saw the incredible miracles of God over and over. How do you think it's not going to happen to you? We start believing our own press, and we take our eyes off of God. The Bible says pride comes before a fall. It can very quickly get us into a lot of trouble. Listen, dad, mom, grandparent, as God blesses you, if we're not careful, we can start to internalize some of that and let our guard down and end up destroying what God is ultimately trying to do in our lives. And Jabez knew this. I don't know, maybe he's seen it happen before. Maybe he was in the crowd and he's watching other people and he's like, man, why didn't they? And so he's like, God, I need your blessing, but would you keep your hand on me? Because if the pain that I started out in this life is any indication, the truth is I can get into a lot more pain if you take your hand off me. So please, keep me from that. Keep me from that. Don't remove your hand. He took a proactive approach to temptation. And I just ask you, how would you describe your approach? Are you asking for God's hand in your life to help you and guide you and guard you? Or do you feel as though you are strong enough and smart enough and not like everybody else to navigate things on your own? It was a mark of an ordinary fella named Jabez, and it was essential to him receiving the blessing from God. Is it a mark of your life? As the worship team comes, I would just ask that you would stand with me as we wrap up this morning. Ordinary people, extraordinary God. Jabez was just one of 936 names. Between 1 Chronicles chapter 1 and 1 Chronicles chapter 9, we read about fathers and sons. So-and-so was this guy's daddy, and so-and-so was this guy's son. Unpronounceable names over and over and over. 936. You want to go to sleep tonight? Pull that out. You will be out after the first, you won't get past chapter 1, guarantee you. But hidden in all of this, in chapter 4, verses 9 and 10, we realize God did something extraordinary in Jabez's life. Why did he stand out? What was about him that made the difference? He was just a regular fellow, but as we look at his profile, we begin to see some things. He lived out God's principle of honor. He refused to let pain define him. He humbly sought God's blessing. And he took a proactive approach to temptation. And here's the final thought that I really feel like I need to share. It works. Like at the end of his profile, we find out God granted Jabez's request. God said yes. And here's what I want you to hear. You don't have to rip a blessing out of a tight-fisted God. My dad used to do this thing when I was a kid, and he would He'd put a piece of candy, like a Jolly Rancher or something, in his hand. And then he would close a fist around it. And then he'd look at my brother and I and say, hey, if you guys want this, you're going to have to get it out. I'm a fella. I like my candy. Challenge accepted. So the next few minutes is just a struggle of my brother and I. One's holding down the arm. The other one's trying to peel back each finger to get the elusive Jolly Ranchers. And I just want to tell you that God doesn't play those games. Like, honestly, he doesn't. It's not this game where we have to struggle and we have to fight with God to peel back each finger to get to the good stuff. He wants you to have the good stuff. More so even than you probably right now want the good stuff. And right now in this moment, I'm just going to ask, you know what, that everyone who needs a touch from God this morning, if you want God's blessing in your life, we're going to open up the altars and call you to the front. And the response today is for ordinary people. I mean, no extraordinary people allowed. Just ordinary people. Ordinary people who want to see God do something extraordinary in their life. Ashley's going to begin to lead us in worship, and I'm going to ask you to find your place up front, and maybe you need to close your eyes. Maybe you need to lift your hands toward heaven. Maybe you need to kind of forget about everybody else in the room, and let's recognize that He is in the room. And give honor where honor is due. Let's not ignore the pain, but rather let's make some decisions to face into the pain and deal with the pain so we can overcome it and allow it not to define us any longer. This morning, let's humbly seek His blessing while understanding our need for His guidance and help as we take our next steps. So let's come before God with honesty, with sincerity, just like Jabez did. With an understanding that I need Him. I need Him. I need Him. With a desire for all that God has for you. And with a hope that tomorrow I can be more than I am today. In Jesus Christ. So if that's you, as Ashley begins to play, that is the response. That is the call. Come.
I am chosen, not forsaken.